The golden light of dawn spills over Kelowna, painting the quiet streets in soft hues of pink and amber. Doreen Montgomery steps into her backyard, barefoot, the cool morning grass tickling her toes. The air is fresh, carrying the sweet scent of blooming petunias, her pride and joy since moving into her grandmother's old house. Muggs, her loyal but mischievous basset hound, trots beside her, sniffing at the flower beds with exaggerated curiosity. Nearby, Goliath, the aloof orange tabby, lounges on the garden bench, watching with half-lidded disdain. Thaddeus, the African gray parrot with a penchant for drama, perches on the fence, muttering snippets of past conversations in his gravelly voice. Doreen kneels beside her petunias, running her fingers over the velvety petals. They should be vibrant, healthy, but something is off. A few clusters look wilted, their edges tinged with an unnatural yellow. She frowns, leaning closer. A faint, acrid smell lingers beneath the floral sweetness, something chemical and out of place. "Pretty poison!" Thaddeus suddenly squawks, making her jump. Doreen glances at the parrot, her pulse quickening. "What did you say, Thaddeus?" "Pretty poison! Pretty poison!" he repeats, bobbing his head. She stares back at the flowers, unease settling in her stomach. It's probably nothing, overwatering maybe, or a pest. But Thaddeus has an uncanny habit of echoing words with eerie relevance. And if there's one thing Doreen has learned since becoming an accidental sleuth, it's that Kelowna's picturesque charm often hides darker secrets. Muggs whines, pawing at the soil near the wilted patch. Doreen hesitates, then digs her fingers into the dirt. Her nail catches on something hard, a small glass vial half buried. She pulls it out, wiping away the dirt. The label is faded, but one word is still legible: arsenic. The peaceful morning shatters in an instant. The vial glints in the morning sun, its surface still smeared with dirt. Doreen's fingers tremble as she turns it over, the word arsenic burning into her mind. This isn't just some discarded bottle, it's fresh, recently buried, and her petunias didn't wilt on their own. Muggs sniffs at the disturbed soil, his tail stiffening as he lets out a low, uncertain whine. Even Goliath, usually indifferent to anything that doesn't involve his next nap, hops down from the bench and slinks closer, his golden eyes fixed on the vial. Thaddeus flaps his wings and shrieks, "Bad news! Bad news!" Doreen's pulse races. She glances around her yard, half expecting to see someone watching from the hedges. But the neighborhood is quiet, save for the distant hum of a lawnmower and the chirping of sparrows. She digs deeper, her fingers clawing through the damp earth. The soil gives way too easily. Someone wanted this found. Or maybe they hadn't meant for it to be uncovered at all. Then her nails scrape against something solid. Not glass this time, something rough, wrapped in a disintegrating cloth. She tugs it free, her breath catching as the fabric falls away to reveal a tarnished silver locket, its delicate chain tangled in roots. Her thumb brushes over the latch, and with a click, it springs open. Inside, a faded photograph of a woman smiles up at her. A face she doesn't recognize. But it's the inscription on the back that sends a chill down her spine. "Forgive me. I never meant for it to go this far." A twig snaps nearby. Doreen whirls around, clutching the locket to her chest. The yard is empty, but the air feels heavier now, charged with something unseen. This isn't just about poisoned flowers anymore. Someone buried a secret here, and she's just dug it up. The locket felt heavy in Doreen's pocket as she marched up the steps of the Kelowna RCMP detachment, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. Muggs trotted beside her, his leash tangled around her wrist, while Thaddeus rode on her shoulder muttering, "911." 911 exclamation mark under his breath. Even Goliath had deigned to join them, slinking along behind like a fuzzy orange shadow. The receptionist barely looked up from her computer before sighing. "Let me guess. You want Corporal Moreau?" Before Doreen could answer, Mac's deep voice called out from down the hallway. "I already heard the squawking. Might as well send her back." Mac stood leaning against his desk when she entered, his uniform crisp as always, his expression caught between amusement and exasperation. His eyes flicked to the animals. "You brought the whole circus this time." Doreen plopped the evidence bag on his desk with more force than necessary. "Someone poisoned my petunias and buried this." The locket clinked against the vial inside the plastic. Mac picked it up, his cop face sliding into place. "You were digging in your garden again." "Gardening is not a crime, Mac. With you, it usually leads to one." He examined the vial, his frown deepening. "This is old. Labels faded, but..." His fingers stilled on the locket. "Where exactly did you find this?" "Under the poisoned flowers." Someone wanted to hide something. She leaned forward. "And I think that someone might be..." "Hold on." Mac held up a hand. "You can't just go around accusing people because your parrot has a flair for drama." Thaddeus chose that moment to flap onto Mac's desk. "Drama! Crime scene! Drama!" Mac rubbed his temples. "I'll run these for prints, check missing persons for the locket. But Doreen..." He fixed her with that stern look that never quite worked on her. "Stay out of it. No interrogating neighbors, no sneaking into places you shouldn't be." Doreen smiled sweetly. "Of course not." The way Mac's eye twitched told her he didn't believe her for a second. As they left the station, Thaddeus nibbled her ear. "Liar, liar," he whispered gleefully. Doreen patted her pocket where she'd kept a second photo, one that hadn't made it into Mac's evidence bag. A face she recognized from Nan's old scrapbooks. The investigation was just getting started. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet cul-de-sac as Doreen adjusted the sun hat she'd borrowed from Nan's closet. A floppy, floral thing that made her look properly gardening enthusiast rather than nosy amateur detective. Muggs strained against his leash, sniffing eagerly at the base of Mrs. Jameson's prize-winning rose bushes. She'd started with the houses closest to hers, clipboard in hand, pretending to conduct a neighborhood beautification survey. It was flimsy, but people loved giving opinions about their yards. Mrs. Beasley from number 42 was her first stop. The elderly widow peered through her screen door, her gaze sharp despite the cataract glasses. "Petunias, you say?" "Mine have been wilting, too. Thought it was those darn aphids." Her wrinkled hands clutched a teacup. "Though old Mr. Henderson next door swore someone was sneaking through yards last week. Saw flashlights bobbing around near your fence, dear." Doreen's pen stilled. "Did he say what night?" "Tuesday, I think. Right before the storm." Mrs. Beasley leaned closer, her whisper carrying the scent of peppermint. "Between you and me, that new couple at number 37 had a screaming match that same evening. Something about, 'You promised we were done with all that.'" At number 37, a tanned man in his 40s answered the door shirtless, a yoga mat under one arm. "Survey?" He laughed too loud. "We just rent. Talk to the landlord about the landscaping." His smile didn't reach his eyes. Behind him, a woman's voice snapped. "Who is it, Greg?" The way he shifted to block the doorway told Doreen more than any answer. By sunset, the puzzle pieces refused to fit. Retired pharmacist Mr. Henderson had abruptly trimmed his hedge facing Doreen's yard. Just needed pruning. The college kids at number 39 mentioned weird chemical smells last week, and Nan's best friend, Ida, watering her geraniums across the street, casually dropped that the locket looked like one Mildred Abernathy wore before she vanished in 1998. As Doreen turned toward home, a flicker of movement caught her eye. Someone standing in Henderson's upstairs window watching her. The curtain twitched shut. Thaddeus, perched on her shoulder, let out a low whistle. Trouble, trouble. Muggs growled at the shadows lengthening across the sidewalk. Somewhere in these friendly smiles and trimmed hedges, a killer was listening, and she just knocked on their door. The Kelowna Public Library hummed with the quiet energy of late-night studiers and insomniac researchers as Doreen spread her notes across a secluded corner table. Muggs snored softly under her chair, his paws twitching in some canine dream, while Goliath perched atop the microfilm reader, tail flicking with predatory interest at the scrolling images. She'd been at it for hours, chasing the ghost of Mildred Abernathy. The faded newspaper clippings from 1998 smelled of dust and aged paper, their brittle edges crackling under her fingers. "Local woman vanishes after garden club meeting," read the headline. The accompanying photo showed a much younger Nan standing beside a smiling woman, Mildred, her neck adorned with the same silver locket now tucked in Doreen's pocket. Thaddeus, unusually quiet, pecked at a highlighted passage. "Poisoned petals," he muttered, as if the words meant something. Doreen's breath caught. She flipped to another article, a small, overlooked paragraph at the bottom of page 7. Abernathy's prized petunias were found destroyed the morning after her disappearance, the soil laced with an unidentified toxin. Her hands trembled. History was repeating itself. Then she found it, buried in the archives of the Kelowna Gazette Society pages. A photo of Mildred standing beside a familiar face. Mr. Henderson, younger, broader, but unmistakable. The caption read, "Garden Club treasurer and secretary enjoy the annual flower show." A shadow fell across the table. "You're digging up things best left buried, Ms. Montgomery." Doreen jerked back, knocking over her coffee. Ida stood there, her usual cheerful demeanor gone, her eyes dark with something like warning. "Ida, you knew Mildred. You knew Henderson was—" "Careful." Ida's voice dropped to a whisper. "Some weeds have deep roots, and some people will kill to keep their secrets." She slid a folded photograph across the table, Henderson and Mildred arguing by the garden club's compost bins. On the back, a single word, arsenic. The pieces clicked. Henderson hadn't just known Mildred, he'd killed her. And now, Doreen was planting herself right in his path. The rain came down in sheets as Doreen dashed across Henderson's overgrown lawn, the locket burning a hole in her pocket. Thunder rumbled in the distance, masking the crunch of her footsteps on the wet gravel. She hadn't waited for Mac. She hadn't even told Nan where she was going. All she had was the photograph, the locket, and the terrible certainty that she was right. Muggs whined at her heels, his ears flattened against the storm. Even Thaddeus, usually so vocal, had gone silent beneath the shelter of her raincoat. Only Goliath seemed unfazed, slinking ahead with the quiet confidence of a predator. The back porch light flickered as she raised her fist to knock, but the door creaked open before she could touch it. Unlocked. "Mr. Henderson?" she called, stepping inside. The house smelled of mothballs and something sharper, chemical, medicinal, the kind of scent that clung to a pharmacist's hands. A floorboard groaned upstairs. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she crept toward the staircase, Muggs pressing close beside her. The living room walls were lined with framed photos, Henderson smiling beside prize-winning dahlias, Henderson shaking hands at garden club ceremonies, and in every shot, lurking at the edges, was Mildred, until she wasn't. "You shouldn't be here." Doreen spun around. Henderson stood in the kitchen doorway, his gardening shears glinting in the dim light. His smile was cordial, but his eyes were cold, especially not in weather like this. She forced herself to breathe. "I found Mildred's locket, buried in my yard." His grip tightened on the shears. "Did you now? You killed her." The words hung between them, sharp as the blade in his hand. "And you tried to hide it by poisoning her flowers, just like someone poisoned mine." Henderson's laugh was brittle. "You're as naive as she was. Mildred knew what I was doing with the club's funds. She threatened to expose me, to ruin everything." He took a step forward. A little arsenic in her tea, and suddenly she was just another missing person. No one looked too hard, no one cared. Doreen backed toward the door. "I care, and now you'll disappear too." His voice was almost gentle. Another tragic accident, another nosy woman who shouldn't have poked around. Muggs lunged with a snarl, sinking his teeth into Henderson's leg. The shears clattered to the floor as Henderson howled, just as Goliath launched himself from the bookshelf, claws out. Thaddeus took flight in the chaos, wings beating against Henderson's face as he screamed, "911! Murder! 911 exclamation mark." Doreen didn't wait. She ran for the door, fumbling for her phone, but headlights cut through the rain before she could dial. Mac's cruiser skidded to a halt in the driveway, his door slamming open. "Doreen, what the hell are you doing?" Behind her, Henderson staggered onto the porch, bleeding and furious. Mac's hand went to his holster. The game was up. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead as Doreen sat wrapped in a scratchy RCMP-issued blanket, her damp hair still dripping onto her shoulders. Across the interrogation room table, Mac sighed for what felt like the 100th time, his pen tapping an impatient rhythm against his notepad. "You broke into a suspect's house, alone, with no backup." His voice was low, the kind of calm that came from sheer, exhausted disbelief. Doreen sipped the terrible station coffee and winced. Technically, the door was open. Mac's glare could have melted steel. Outside the room, Henderson's furious shouts echoed down the hall as officers processed him. His rants about meddling women and that damned parrot, punctuated by Thaddeus's occasional perfectly timed mimicry of his threats. Muggs, sprawled across Doreen's feet, let out a contented sigh, his tail thumping against the floor. Goliath, having commandeered Mac's chair the moment he stood up, licked a paw with regal indifference. "You could have been killed," Mac said finally, quieter now. Doreen met his eyes. "But I wasn't. And Mildred's family finally gets answers." She pulled the locket from her pocket and set it on the table between them. The silver caught the light, the engraved initials M.A. gleaming after decades in the dark. Mac exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "We found the garden club financial records hidden in Henderson's basement, skimmed funds going back to the 90s, and enough arsenic in his shed to kill half the neighborhood." He shook his head. "You were right. Again." The admission hung in the air, almost as surprising as the tiny, grudging smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The morning sun painted Doreen's backyard in gold as she knelt in the freshly turned soil, replanting her petunias. The wilted ones were gone, the poisoned earth replaced. Mildred's locket, now cleaned and polished, hung from a nearby branch, twirling gently in the breeze. A memorial. Nan shuffled over with a tray of lemonade, her eyes bright. "Front page of the Kelowna Gazette, you know. Cold case solved by local gardener and her pets." She winked. They left out the part where Thaddeus drew blood. As if on cue, the parrot swooped down to land on the fence, his beady eyes fixed on something across the street. "New mystery," he announced. Doreen followed his gaze. A moving truck was parked outside number 37, the yoga-loving couple loading boxes in a hurry. A glint of metal tumbled from one, a trowel, its blade stained an ominous reddish brown. She sighed, reaching for her gardening gloves. Some weeds, it seemed, did have deep roots, but so did justice. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.